We have a massive star-powered panel with a combined IQ of 11 gajillion. It's going to be amazing. There's so many smart folks on here. They're going to be talking about live ops strategies that are a must for every game developer. I hope you guys will enjoy, get a great download from this. Don't forget to join the conversation on Discord. And please don't forget to throw your questions into the Q&A section down at the very bottom of your screen. And with that, I am going to get out of the way and let Emil take over because I know he is going to do an amazing job with this. So take it away, Emil.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, welcome to the panel. We're gonna be talking about live ops strategies that are a must for every game developer. We have an amazing lineup of panelists. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves really briefly, but we got Stuart Muckley from Code Wizards, Philipp Karstaedt from Metagames, James Mayo from 8 Circuit Studios, Pierre Katkoff from Unity, and Amy Huang might be coming in later from Metal 163. So let's do a quick round of introductions, everyone. So Pierre, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm Pierre. I work at Unity in the publisher operations team. So we basically help developer grow their game, and we're basically made of former data analysts, producer, PMs. And myself, I was a PM for a bit more than 4 years at Green Panda Games. So we were a publisher in specializing in idle mobile games, and that's me.
Thanks, Pierre. Philipp, do you want to continue?
Sure, when I find my unmute button. So my name is Philipp. I'm co-founder and COO of Metagames currently, which is a self-publishing developer located in Berlin, Germany, making mobile games for esports fans. My background is classically on the publishing side, so monetization, live ops, marketing, kind of all these classical publisher functions, and I've been working on the publishing side for most of my career in gaming, but now recently started this kind of first foray into game development with Metagames. My last experience prior to that was running the GRE office for Europe, which again was a classical publishing office.
Thanks, Philipp. And James?
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is James Mayo. I'm the founder of 8 Circuit Studios. We're currently working on a sci-fi PvP title called Project Genesis. My background, it comes kind of breaks into 2 parts. One's on the publishing side, AAA, in development though for first-party titles. And then the second part is development houses that build titles for bigger publishers. But over the course of the last decade or so, I've started working at smaller companies in the indie space. Just in terms of my role, I typically occupy the role of producer, which is, you can think schedules, budgets, resources, team building, trying to talk to upper management about risk and trying to get products shipped on time. So that's my background there.
Thanks, James. And finally, Stuart.
Yeah, I'm Stuart Muckley. I'm the CEO of Code Wizards. Arguably, I've got the 5th best beard on this call. We've got a slightly unique perspective to this stuff because we're coming at it from the game tech side of things. We do a lot of integrations, working with a lot of companies that are out there, and also around esport tech. So hopefully my perspective is useful in this call.
Thank you. And my name is Emil. I'm a product manager at Funday Factory, and we're a mobile game studio, and we've done real-time multiplayer shooter games from mobile, like Bull League. So we also know firsthand, I know firsthand what impact live ops can have, and also how important it is to actually prepare for it, not just let it sort of rolling with the punches. As I said, we're a mobile studio. We also do currently working a lot with multiplayer games for Snapchat. And prior to Funday, I also did a multiplayer game for the Ouya. So if there's any Ouya fans in the audience, shout out. But let's get started. So live ops is a huge thing. How should you start as a developer? What questions should designers ask themselves when they're building a game? And when should designers sort of start to think about live ops? Stuart, do you wanna kick this off?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to start early as you possibly can. So where we build prototypes to try and play out with games and, you know, let people see how it works and the vibe, we often plug a live ops platform in there for that very reason. It just allows the people outside the techies to play with it. The other thing really is just trying to get ahead of time. So the last thing you want to be doing at the end of a game just before you go gold is strapping on a live op system and handling your multiplayer and scaling. But inevitably, that's what happens. So if you can fix those things early, it's kind of like hygiene. It'll just get you started. It gets a lot of problems out of the way, and it allows people outside of the development team then to play with things, try things, get things ready, and get strategies ready. It also enables you a chance to realize what effort you're going to have to put into iterating once this game actually goes live and what it'll do. So as early as possible, in short.
Pierre, is that the same sort of approach that you're seeing both from, you know, talking with developers at Unity, but also from your time as a hyper casual producer? Was that something that you started thinking about at the very start?
Yeah, and the thing is, people have to realize you have to adapt your live ops also to your team, right? To your team capacity, to your team skills, to your team knowledge, right? If you're a 10-person studio, you're not gonna like release content every single week, or you're gonna release like a very low amount of content, right? So I think you have to think about it early, but also you have to strategize about it early, right? What type of events am I gonna run? Is it only like to optimize my monetization, or is it really to create new, to improve my gameplay, to improve my code, stuff like that. So yeah.
How about in the hyper casual space? Would you say is live ops something that's suitable for all types of game genres, or are there specific genres where over a broader stroke you see like more relevant here than others?
Well, I mean, the specialty of hyper casual is really to take something that is very complex and to dumb it down, right? To make it the simplest version possible. So it's still possible, but it comes later on, right? Because it's not where hyper casual makes its money, right? And even with casual idols, stuff like that, that are not that complex, you can think of it a bit later on. But usually outside of this, basically, if you're profitable at day 3, right, you don't have to really think about live ops. But if it's much later, which is the case for the vast majority of genre, think about it early.
How about you, Philip? When you build games and when you're angry, was that also something that you thought about early in your projects?
Yeah, it's funny because like lately, you know, like live ops used to be this kind of like super like mid-core thing. It used to be this kind of like almost like, you know, like PC MMORPGs from Asia kind of in the early, you know, like 2005 kind of type, where you had like all these events that were running and they were like really kind of like monetization geared, right? But then of course, like, you know, mobile games appeared and there's like a large role of live ops in mid-core mobile games. But then you see that suddenly, you know, there's like all these things, and I guess, you know, the example is always like, you know, Puzzles and Empires is kind of this like, there's like, you know, casual games that are having like progression systems, and as long as you have any progression system in the game, right, you basically need live ops. And that is something that, you know, because it influences so many different aspects in the life cycle, right? From very early on, right? Like usually it was like, okay, launch an MVP, you know, just like see how people interact with your like your core gameplay. And that is true, right? But player experience is changing. Like if I download a game and I don't see like that this game is alive and something is happening and there's like events like within the first like 2-3 days, that gives me a certain impression of a game, right? Rather than me seeing, okay, there's something going on, there's something cool, there's like new things. And so, you know, whether you're like trying to kind of like launch a game, see how it's working, see how users are progressing through like whatever, like a meta system you have, you know, like live ops are a great way to kind of like shape that experience, shape those couple first day. Live ops is a great way to accelerate, you know, progression later on when you realize that, you know, you experience from like that you planned at day 7 to day 14. That's like amazing, right? Like why shouldn't people have it from day 3? right? So it's all these ways and means in which it can really enable you to run and develop a game very efficiently. And it just like also like shapes your thinking when you're developing it, like asking what events can I run, you know, what could go wrong here, what might I need to fix, and do I need to launch a new version, do I need to like do a rebalancing of the whole thing, or can I maybe kind of like at least maybe as a stopgap put like a live ops feature on it, right, that at least helps me to understand better what the problem really is. So it has become more and more like an integral part, even in game design, I would say.
Thank you. And James, I mean, Project Genesis, and you know, what was it, pre-alpha right now? Do you also feel that player expectations are high, and that you know, as Philipp says, like the need for the game to appear alive and enough content to sate their demands and appetites?
Super high. Let's see. So live ops is super interesting. It's in my experience, it's like the most complicated type of development that you can take on. The number of moving parts that you have to take into consideration, which is why I think all of the advice we're hearing so far is think about this stuff early, really try and see into the future. It's crucial to maybe ask yourself a couple of different questions. You know, ask oneself, you know, what role do you play in your company? And where does that role fit in driving goals and priorities in the live ops enterprise? If you're a designer and you've got great aspirations to work in a live game where you can continually iterate, you know, that might be a good driver, but the competence of the team is super crucial. So if you don't have technical talent to be able to support that iteration, it could be quite challenging. On the other end, it might be something like if you're in business development, you might like live operations because it's reoccurring revenue over time, but you may not have a strong design team to be able to support that. And then to Philipp's point, you know, then you don't have a game that is actually feeling like it's alive to players or entertaining or interesting. So there's so many factors that go into the question that I think you as a team have to get really clear on the why you're choosing to go down the live ops road. It doesn't mean that that you have to be a huge team. It doesn't mean that you have to have a huge budget, but everybody who's on the team, even if it's one person, just has to be super clear about what it is that they're getting themselves into. And admittedly, I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I decided that live ops was the direction that we should go. However, we are sort of weird in that we've got a super long runway. And so that's helped us make a lot of mistakes. And so hopefully some of that experience you guys can learn from the teeth that we got knocked out as we went through this process. But yeah, I do think players' expectations are super high. So yeah, you do have to make sure that you know what you're providing to them is consistent and is also a demonstration of progress. I think that there is a little bit of latitude and patience, especially if people believe in you as a development team. Like if they enjoy your characters, and there's a lot of engagement that you have to do as individuals. But if you can do that, oftentimes the early, almost like a small indie band who plays music, you might find just those couple of fans who will be with you through the course of your journey, and they'll give you a lot of latitude themselves to come along on that journey, just as long as you're with them every step of the way.
100% agree, James. I think that's also something that I hear time and time again at panels like ours and at the talks here at PTC, is that the building a fan base and catering to them and actually listening to them and collaborating with them is a huge part of building. And that's almost like that is a panel worthy of discussion all in itself. But Stuart, you consult with external companies often. Do you I think James and all of us feel this is it's a daunting task. It's a big task. It's something that you feel like developers are excited to get started about when you talk to them?
I think there's a real mix. There's a bunch out there who want to build everything, and there's a real temptation to do that. And you know, I've probably bored enough people with it before, but you know, you don't need to build a Ferrari. People are doing this. A normal car will satisfy you just as well. The live op systems that are out there are awesome. Unless you need hyperscale or something really funky, you know, don't go off piste. But the bit that I find developers are really reticent around is the thing that's actually best and most advantageous for them, which is developing screens and UIs so that normal human beings, non-developers, can actually use the system, can actually tweak things and actually use the system. You know, the amount of times where we've seen developers stuck on a game as it launches and not able to iterate and move on because they are the live ops. They have to code everything. You know, if I see another screen where you have to pump a huge chunk of JSON in and we're asking users to do it, you know, it's crazy. Let's give the people the tools they need to do. And to James's point about the cost of doing this, it's a really strange cyclical feel you've got to give yourself as a developer, which is the cost of doing this now and my development days actually saves how many development days when I'm actually going towards gold and it's critical, we need to fix our game, and 10 times as many days across the lifespan of this game. So you've really got to think of it as an investment. It may be painful, bits of it may be boring. You know, some people choose to like outsource it to people like us, and that's great. And some people like to do it in-house, and some people are a mix. But try and tackle it early. You know, eat that frog, as they say.
How about you, Philip? Like in terms of return on investment and the time spent, you often in games here talks about, you know, we're building content for the elder players, the players who stick around not just for day 360, day 365, but day 720. Like how much of a pipeline should developers be able to take on there?
I mean, I hope none of our investors are in the audience right now, but like there is some advantage, right? Especially when you have a very young game and you're developing it. And like, you know, like mobile game development is like very iterative, like you're launching something that by no means had all the progression systems, right? And live ops, you know, like works almost like, you know, at any given kind of point in a user lifetime. So even new users, right? If you see that you have an amazing product audience fit, right, but you don't have the kind of maybe progression systems to keep players like, you know, really engaged for those kind of classical like 30-day retention rate, and you're seeing that, okay, like maybe even 14 days, maybe even 7 days, right? Already having like a dynamic system to like create content and create engagement like from right away, like it can already give you like some lift even like at like a very early retention, right? And so that like that buys you breathing space, right, to like also like do a little bit more in and on the development side, show a little bit more progress, maybe if you're talking to publishers, if you're talking to investors. So that's time extremely well spent, right? And again, also the mindset is a little bit different, right, from classical game development or like box game development or how you want to call it. Like it just requires a thinking of, you know, again, like how am I like building like a dynamic system that can kind of support, you know, like with some configuration that there's like stuff that can change in the game that's dynamic. Like it really forces you to think in a very iterative way as well. So it's both kind of from a mindset perspective, right? It helps you develop a game that can grow over time, but it also, like, you know, buys you a little bit of time to actually build that game. So yeah, some, you know, you can create nice spikes with live ops, like just saying.
That also, I think that also feeds into what often what platforms are looking for, right? Like if you put a game out on, it doesn't matter if it's Steam or it's on the App Store, the platform holders also want to see you actually feed into that, not just like dump and forget. So, and they will reward that with, you know, features and visibility and organic installs. But Pierre, Stuart talked about, you know, the team composition playing a massive role here as well. Is that something where you're sort of seeing what are you seeing when you're talking to studios in your role at Unity? Do you see sort of team compositions varying massively, and how are the different teams then sort of thinking about live ops? Is there a tendency, what I'm trying to ask is there a tendency that smaller developers tend to basically say like, we'll patch this later, we'll eat the frog when we feel like it, not right now?
Yeah, so once again, I think it really comes back to the studio size every time, right? Sometimes I see like dedicated teams, even though the studio is small. Sometimes we have like 2 or 3 people dedicated to live ops. Sometimes it's just like the CTO running like events and designing and looking at data, right? So it's really diverse, but the general trend is really to just hire people specialize in that, or just to run events, to run live ops, right? And the thing is, we talked about thinking about live ops early, but also iterating on your live ops early is key, right? Because starting to know your audience early, what do they like? Are they like weekly players? Are they monthly players also, right? Do you have to have weekly events? Do you have to have like daily sales, right? It's really, really specific to each game, to each audience, really. So it's really diverse, but the big trend is, yeah, we need to iterate early on that, and we need to focus resources on live ops, right? So
yeah, and it's also really like at the end, right? Like you go for like an 80-20 solutions, right? Like it's been mentioned before, like don't reinvent the wheel, right? Like you don't need to immediately kind of like, put like 3 BI people behind it. But again, the other side of live ops is this measuring thing. Again, it also shapes your perception of how to develop the game, right? If you're already thinking, hey, I need to understand how live ops is working and what live ops I need, I can run, it automatically puts you in a frame of mind that is like, well, I actually need analytics for my game, right? I need to really track like kind of like user behavior in terms of, what is their kind of like user voyage. And that already puts you on a pace of making a game that's very publishable, that is definitely, can potentially have a really long lifetime. And this is something that, from my publishing this, when I would agree and looking at all these like young studios, right? Like kind of like, we made this game, we want to have a look at it. Like we'd like to have it published. And it's like, well, what about BI? What about live ops? Like, how am I going to operate this game? Have you ever thought about that? And it's like, no, like, I mean, it's really hard. Like some of these game ideas are amazing, right? And there's like definitely potential for like high engagement, high retention games. But if you can't operate them, like it's gonna be a pain, and like people are gonna look at it and say like, yeah, great idea, but we're gonna copy it. So it's really, it gives you like a little bit of more of that frame of mind that may be very helpful.
But Phil, would you also say like that translates to the approach that the team needs to take? Because coming from a smaller studio, when we ran our game and took it towards live ops, it also for us made it very clear that there were gaps in perception in terms of what the goal really was here. So from a product management perspective, it often comes down to sales and moving units. But from a team or design perspective, it can often be tied more to, we need to drive events in like the core game, and we need to build stuff that will take longer time to build. Do you sort of see a difference in mentality, and is there a point to sort of shift teams around when you go from, like, let's say you do take on a production, do you make a mindful decision when you were agreed to then take off the OG team and put on a live ops team to sort of handle the day-to-day ops?
I don't think that's super great idea necessarily. Usually people like the games they created and they want to see them grow. And unless I mean, it depends on the team, right? Like some people are just going to be like, okay, I'm working on a game, I done it, this is the experience, I created this work of art, I'm moving on to the next thing. Sure, fair enough, right? Are those the games that are necessarily commercially successful for a long time? Doubtful, right? But if you really kind of invested heart and soul in a game, then how it's supposed to be placed. You build like the whole, like 1 year user voyage out, and you want to see it through, I guess. Then again, I guess it's more of like a question of an addition to the team, especially for like a smaller studio. I think when we had the conversation before the panel, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking like, like some of your earliest hires probably needs to be someone from like, a publisher, or at least someone who has experience in publishing function, especially, these classical like foundational situations of studios. You have a game designer plus artist plus CTO, right? That's basically almost your fourth hire is like someone with that publishing and kind of like with that background. Again, depending on the ambition, right? Again, there's enough amazing indie studios that really are creating amazing games that don't need live ops, right? So it's of course, it's a question of what you want to do. But again, if you want to ask someone to publish a game, you better think about this, and you better kind of prepare that game to be published. Otherwise, it's going to be like a hard sell.
So James, is that something that you're thinking about?
Yeah, 100%. Actually, there's a lot that resonates there. So for us, I think the big question that we had was, is our game even going to be fun to play? Is there a market for it? Do people want to do people want to play it? So we chose to eat a lot of frogs in the process. And one of the frogs that we ate was, let's open up the game super early, like probably a year before alpha, which is super dangerous. And we did that on Steam. And that's hurt us in a certain kind of way, because new people who came in who didn't really follow along with the team, they the game wasn't ready for prime time. And so those reviews went up on Steam and they stuck, and they're still there. And so when new players today, a year on, come in and check out the game, it's not a great experience for them to just, if they're reviewing, if they're just taking a quick look. However, one of the things that we asked ourselves probably halfway through was, what is the type of game that we want to work on forever? Because that's just the assumption that we made with live ops. And that actually dictated our course quite a bit, and actually helped us select which features we were going to implement. And it just made the decision-making process so easy to trim the fat. So while we still experimented along the way for this, this year that we were out in the public, we knew what we were experimenting and directing towards. And as we've gotten further and further along, even those reviews may not be reflective of the game as it currently is, for us, it's not daunting that maybe some people don't appreciate the game. That's actually a good thing, that they self-select themselves out of the purchase. So as we've gone further along, the team has gone through something like, I think we did 3 releases before we went early access on Steam, and then we've done 9 releases since. We've just gotten stronger and better as a team, more coherent and cohesive. And so it's almost like battle hardening your team over time. And honestly, we've had people who haven't been good fits, because this is a very difficult endeavor to put yourself on, which is consistently getting critical feedback in an area that it's basically battle hardening your gameplay. And if there aren't a lot of people swelling to your game, that can be challenging too. So you have to have a really tough mindset, I think, if you're going to expose yourself early. Take the chance to eat the frogs ahead of time. But what it's done for us as a team has just made us more and more trusting of each other and trusting in the product that we're building, because those people who do get the game, their support means everything. And now we're actually just starting to break through to this place where people who have never seen us or this type of game before, now we're judging the game on its own merits. And so it's sort of, because we've eaten all the frogs, the rewards that we're getting for the appreciation of the hard work that we put in is well worth it. But there's a lot of endurance involved in that. So maybe, I guess I would just add that.
I think endurance is probably a good term, because it does take time. And so Stuart, in the process that can take, ranging from months and weeks, which might be on the slower, like smaller scale things, to like years. How should studios balance how much feedback they take in, and how, like, what role does analytics and BI play in that, and how, like, where does community, and then finally the designer's gut feeling or the team's gut feelings, like how do you see studios balancing or grappling with those like different things?
Yeah, I'm going to use a weasel word, and it varies heavily, and it really just depends who you're working with. The first thing about the live ops stuff, which I just want to get out there, is, the first thing that I say to people is, really, you're externalizing your config. And what I mean by that is you're stopping baking it into the game client and you're pulling it out somewhere else that other people can play with it. So off that premise, really, you don't stop that. So we've seen games that have worked better in various areas. So it may do massively well in APAC versus, in Western Europe, and then the game's tuned per region. And that's like a big trend that we're seeing, is that one size doesn't fit all. You do fit it to what it is that you need to do, not just for various segments, but around the globe as well. And that's really coming up. The second thing is that you don't stop when you release, because that's when you start to learn a bit more about players, because statistically your sample before you go live is worthless, right? It's you and your friends telling you it's awesome, brilliant, it's great, everyone loves their own baby, it's great. When you go out, the initial burst is you in your most raw form. You haven't tuned this up yet, so you're getting good feedback, but you've got to be careful not to go up and down like crazy with it and try and work stuff out. And then you get into this kind of plateau where the game kind of settles and mellows into middle age, like I have, at which point you kind of know what you're doing a bit more and how to do it. So chaining together the BI and the live ops is really important, because you want to be getting those segments back into your live ops platform. Then you want to be tuning back against those segments. And also in the BI, you don't know what you don't know. It's the unknown unknowns, to quote the Donald Rumsfeld effect. So you've got to go mining for those goodies. You've got to have a hypothesis based, and then you've got to look at the data to lead you to a hypothesis. Then you've got to prove it. And unless you've got this feedback loop, that's just not going to work. So you'll find that some teams basically have a constant spread across it from a tech team. And, they kind of got a retainer model in there. They're going to add some various screens. They're going to add some extra functions. They're going to keep improving and rolling it. Others will do it in bursts if they find something that's important. And it's really what works for that team and how long this game needs to exist for and what you need to do with it, really.
So in terms like piggybacking on that, and like adding those screens and working out like those events, they're speaking from my own experience here. There's often a tendency that you want to go the way of, like, if this isn't working, the only solution is to attach jetpacks and lasers to my Ferrari. Are there smaller systems that you've seen work, Pierre? In like, can you do with less than a laser?
Yes. So the first thing that we've started to say, like, more and more now, is first get a strong analytics pipeline, right? It's like because when you run an event, when you run live ops, you usually have a goal in mind, right? You don't create an event for nothing, right? You have a goal in mind. So first, get to know your data, also get to know your audience, work with your UA team, work with your marketing team. This is not just a separate unit in the company. This is really part of the game, right? Because they know their audience, right? Usually sometimes better than you, because they get them to the game. And in terms of structure of your live ops, I mean, Stuart, you can probably even more of me than that, but yeah, you can go super simple. The thing is, and I think, Philipp, you said that usually it's 80-20, right? First, you copy what others do because it's work, right? If a game is a top grossing game and you're doing the same genre, okay, start by copying, because you just don't know, right? If you don't have the experience there. So just copy first and then start iterating, start making assumptions, start challenging those assumptions, right? But start simple, because usually simple is where you get the most out of your money, and then you can start iterating and do some crazy stuff. But first, get some revenue working, iterate on your live ops, and yeah, start simple, go crazy after.
Yeah, it's so important to get the priorities and the hierarchies, right? Like, live ops won't make a game, like a core game cycle, attractive, right? Live ops won't create a market audience fit, right? Like, these things you have to take care of before, right? It's kind of like after that, when it comes in, when you really, as we said now, when you think you have something promising, like live ops, and I mean, basically progression system on a cool, core gameplay and on a great product audience fit is what makes games successful over the long run. Like, if you want to just put it down to the simplest terms. So progression systems, again, are so like, they're not reliant on live ops, right? And again, you don't need like the huge BI team right at the beginning. There's plenty of tools, from like Unity. They acquired Delta DNA recently, which, so there's plenty of tools, right? Like, don't reinvent the wheels, but use them, right? Like, not using them is like the criminal act almost, right? Where you're just depriving yourself of a lot of kind of opportunities and ways of thinking. So it's a balance, right? It's a balance. And like, no, we're not expecting like all game developers to suddenly like become these like funnel optimizing, live ops, like revenue optimizing, like number machines. Like, it's not the point, right? It is something that, if you don't have it, it hurts you, right? It's as simple as that.
That's
But
a
in terms
super
of-
good.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add that that's a frog that we have not eaten, which is the analytics pipeline. And in place of it, what we've done, again, so we're probably, just to give you an idea where we're at in product development, we're probably anywhere from 3 to 6 months away from alpha. So 3 to 6 months away from code complete. And we're so reliant on our community to help us build out sort of this first stage of not analytics, but it's just really watching them play, seeing what they're excited about, and start there. That's the biggest and broadest brushstroke for us that we're going to paint. And I think that's going to help us get, on the green if it were a golf course. So yeah, I think if we were to eat that frog, I think it would be detrimental to us at this stage. So at least it feels like, yeah, that's an okay decision to make at this point. So,
but are you having are there internal discussions around when you should start sort of using analytics more decidedly?
Yeah, actually, and that is ongoing. Actually, what we're doing right now is talking about building the analytics pipeline. We don't quite yet have it, but yeah, we'll probably start implementation, or at least the development of a pipeline, in maybe 2 or 3 months. Yeah.
So Stuart, when James does get his pipeline up and running, should he be looking at all the KPIs? Are there specific KPIs that he should be more concerned about than others?
Well, we don't see all of the data for the people that we work with, obviously, but so, I'm talking in generalities here, so sorry in advance. But, one thing that's really interesting about James and his game here is that he's already got a community, which is great. The problem you can find with that is that the community understands the game and they understand how to play. And there's a certain shooter by a company that started with an R, which was purchased by EA. And we played an early version of their game when we were working alongside Multiplay. And I hadn't played the previous incarnation of the game, and I had no idea what was going on or what a grunt was. And it's a classic case of it alienated me from the start. And it's always those little bits of data, even the most basic KPIs, can give you an idea about where newbies are going and what's happening with them, because the established community, they get you. They don't need the tutorial. They're already in it. For newbies these days, ignoring mobile games, which don't really use that metric anyway, but actual games on console and PC, the days of giving somebody a book or making them run through a tutorial are just gone. So it's kind of in-game learning. And what analytics does help you do quite a lot there is work out where those hit points are that people are dropping out and not getting it. If they're strolling around a landscape for 10 minutes trying to look for what the hell to do, it's kind of a really good key indicator to give you a nudge and go, look, these kind of guys don't get this. Or it could be a cultural thing as well. We forget about that a lot when we go to a wider audience. There's certain things that we do natively. I mean, there's an apocryphal story, which is, a bunch of Brits started working with these German guys and they were saying, could you do this? And the German guys were going, yes. And a couple of weeks later, they said, cool, is you finished? And the German guy said, you haven't told us to start yet. Because to Brits, we use this very gentle, we don't want to ask too much kind of thing. And, there was no instruction there because that'd be seen as being rude, so it's implied. And it's all those stupid kind of things that you can't kind of preempt, but you'll see strangely through the data where you see a pattern which just looks weird. And then the next question is, why does it look weird? What is it? Or it could all go perfectly. There's a million cases out there where stuff just goes awesomely from day one. So you never know, but it does give you the tools to try and find out what's happening and try and guess or imply what is happening, because you don't know. You can't contact these people and ask them in the main, so you are inferring as well.
I think that's also something that I saw. We also had a Discord community, and we still have with one of our games, and it's a very vocal community. So if you do try and sort of, for us, we try to loosen up the game a little bit to appeal to a wider audience and sort of bring in people who might not be super quick with the thumb controls on a phone. and it gave a massive backlash in the community. But we could sort of look at the metrics. We're like, well, you know, it's not all bad, but there was also an element where we became conscious about like our approach to community and the way that it can influence your thinking, because the entire development team was on Discord. They were not looking at the same graphs that I was looking at. So immediately the concern was, oh no, revert. So there's a sense that, you know, it's okay to run experiments and it's okay to do tests, but also like I think developers also definitely need to give it some time to sort of sit and be okay with it feeling uncomfortable for at least a few weeks or a week or two if they don't have the abilities to A/B test. But Pierre, in terms of KPIs, is there something where you feel like this is the thing that people should be on the lookout for, or is it like Stuart says, like a gut feeling, something you're like, yeah, this is off?
Yeah. So whether you're running an A/B test, whether you're running an event, or just you're building a game, you should have already an idea of what the experience is, right? What is the first session experience? What is like a mid-age player should be able to do in the game after like 3 days, stuff like that, right? You should measure that, right? This is the first thing you're going to do. Of course, you have your very high level KPIs, but everybody has that. And I mean, we don't really care when we talk about the specifics of the game. When you're talking about your game, you're talking about your experience, right? And you should measure everything about that. This is the most important thing, especially because if we come back to live ops, when you're running an event, a promotion, stuff like that, you should have an idea of why you're designing that. Okay, so why are you designing this? You're trying to, I don't know, engage more players to play more games, to have longer session, stuff like that. Okay, measure that, right? This is the first thing you should measure. It's really about intention. You have an intention, measure the result of your experiment.
Yeah, can I just jump in quickly? I think there's a difference there between the free-to-play vibe and the paid-for premium, where, you know, on the premium model, you may be trying to get them and monetize players as well, but a big part of it is that fun factor, that intangible feeling that your player is enjoying the game and is playing it and will socialize the fact that they love the game to get other people to buy it. So yeah, there's definitely two different vibes there that come through from it.
I think you still have a mix of both, right? Like, even though there is this really good feeling about, okay, I love this game, there are still KPIs, and it comes back to have a strong data pipeline behind that. I mean, strong, just using analytics in a smart way, right? By the way, use Delta DNA. Philipp, you did the shameless plug. I didn't. But yeah, it's, even though there is this good feeling that you can't really measure, there are still KPIs to support your hypothesis.
I think that's a good way to start to wrap things up. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, even though this is a super exciting topic. We could go on for probably hours, but we can always take it on into Discord, right, Dave?
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much all for sharing your wisdom. I'm going to pop the link for the Discord channel here into the chat. So everybody, all you panelists, anyone in the audience who didn't have a chance to ask questions, by all means, please jump in. Amazing quality discussion. Thank you all.